The night Emma Reed asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend, Daniel Cooper realized that the worst lies are the ones that start feeling like the truth. Daniel was 38 years old, a project manager for a mid-sized architecture firm in Portland, and he had spent the last 2 years quietly rebuilding a life that had fallen apart when his engagement ended. His ex-fiancée had wanted someone with bigger ambitions and louder dreams. Daniel had wanted someone who understood that steady work and reliable mornings could be their own kind of beautiful. They were both right, and they were both wrong, and now Daniel ate lunch alone at his desk most days and told himself he was fine with it. Emma worked 3 cubicles down. She handled interior specifications and had a laugh that carried across the office like wind chimes. They were work friends in the easy way people become friends when they share coffee runs and complain about the same project delays. Nothing more. Until the Tuesday afternoon she appeared at his desk with her arms crossed and her expression caught somewhere between embarrassed and determined. "I need a favor," she said. "And it's weird, so I'm just going to say it fast. My cousin's getting married this Saturday in Salem, and my entire family thinks I'm bringing someone, and I really need you to pretend to be my boyfriend for 6 hours so my aunt stops setting me up with divorced dentists." Daniel set down his pen. That's the pitch. That's the pitch. Why me?" Emma shifted her weight. "Because you're the only person I know who wouldn't make it weirder than it already is, and because you owe me for covering that client call when you had food poisoning." Daniel considered this. The Oregon spring rain tapped against the window behind him. Emma was 36, practical, and had never once asked him for anything that wasn't reasonable. Her hair was pulled back in a clip that was barely holding on, and there was a smudge of ink on her sleeve. 6 hours, he said. 6 hours? In and out. I'll buy you dinner after. What's the story? Emma exhaled. We've been seeing each other for 3 months. We kept it quiet because of work. You're steady, I'm too sarcastic, and somehow it works. My family will love you because you'll show up and not talk about cryptocurrency. Daniel almost smiled. Okay. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Emma blinked. That was easier than I thought. You covered the food poisoning call, Daniel said. I remember. Saturday arrived with pale gray skies and the smell of wet asphalt. Daniel picked Emma up from her apartment at noon, and she climbed into his car wearing a dark green dress and heels she immediately complained about. She had brought a garment bag and a small overnight kit, and when she buckled in, she turned to him with a nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ground rules, she said. Nothing embarrassing. Keep the touching minimal. If my Aunt Diane asks when we're getting engaged, just smile and change the subject. And if my ex shows up, which he might, do not under any circumstances punch him in the face no matter how much I look like I want you to. Daniel pulled onto the road. Does he deserve to be punched in the face? Probably. But not at my cousin's wedding. The drive to Salem took an hour. Emma filled the silence with stories about her family, most of which involved her younger sister getting everything right and Emma getting everything interesting. Her mother had opinions about everyone's life choices. Her father just wanted people to be happy and stayed out of the way. Her Aunt Diane treated matchmaking like a competitive sport. She introduced me to a guy at Christmas who collected model trains and wouldn't stop talking about gauge standards, Emma said. For 40 minutes, Daniel. 40 minutes about gauge standards? That's a long time, Daniel said. It was a war crime. The wedding was held at a vineyard outside Salem. The ceremony space overlooked rows of grapevines that stretched toward low green hills, and the air smelled like fresh soil and lavender from the arrangements tied to every chair. Emma's family descended on them the moment they arrived. Her mother, Carol, hugged Emma too tightly and studied Daniel with the evaluating gaze of someone conducting an interview. Her father, Pete, shook Daniel's hand and said he'd heard good things. Her sister, Lauren, looked between them and said, You two are actually kind of cute together, in a tone that suggested she hadn't expected that. Aunt Diane arrived wearing a hat that looked like it had been borrowed from a royal wedding and immediately cornered them near the wine table. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, and radiated the energy of someone who had never met a conversation she couldn't dominate. Emma, darling, this must be Daniel, Diane said, extending her hand like she was granting an audience. I've heard almost nothing about you, which means you're either very boring or very private. Which is it? Daniel shook her hand. I'm trying for private. Diane smiled. Good answer. How long has this been going on? 3 months, Emma said. And you didn't tell me? I wanted to be sure before I made it a whole thing. Diane turned back to Daniel. What do you do? Project management. Architecture. Steady work? That's good. Emma needs steady. She's always been too flighty? Diane said this like it was a medical diagnosis. Emma's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Diane leaned in conspiratorially. Tell me, Daniel, are you thinking long-term here, or are we keeping expectations realistic? Daniel felt Emma's hand land on his arm, a silent plea to end the interrogation. He looked at Diane evenly. I don't date people if I'm not thinking long-term. That feels like wasting everyone's time. Diane's eyebrows lifted. Well, that's refreshing. She drifted away toward another group of relatives, and Emma exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. She's a nightmare. She's fine, Daniel said. But you're not flighty. Emma glanced at him, something shifting in her expression. Thanks. The ceremony started 20 minutes later. Daniel and Emma sat together in the third row, her hand resting lightly on his knee in a way that looked natural to anyone watching and felt like live voltage to Daniel. The vows were simple and sweet, and when the bride and groom kissed, Emma leaned closer to him and whispered, "If you ever make me get married at a vineyard, I'll kill you." Daniel almost laughed out loud. The reception was held in a converted barn with string lights hung from the rafters and long tables covered in white cloth. Daniel and Emma were seated with her sister Lauren, Lauren's husband, and two of Emma's cousins who spent most of dinner asking Daniel questions designed to catch him in a lie. Where did he grow up? How did he and Emma meet? What was their first date? Emma had prepared him for some of this, but Daniel found that the easiest answers were the ones closest to the truth. They met at work. Their first real conversation was about a project disaster that wasn't either of their faults. They liked each other because neither of them pretended to be more interesting than they were. Lauren watched them across the table with a small smile. When Emma got up to use the restroom, Lauren leaned toward Daniel and said, "You're good for her." "I can tell." "We're just figuring it out," Daniel said. "That's what people say when it's working," Lauren said. Emma returned a few minutes later, and the music started. The dance floor filled quickly with couples and children, and Emma looked at Daniel with an apologetic expression. "We should probably dance once, just for appearances." Daniel stood and offered his hand, just for appearances. They moved onto the floor, and Daniel rested one hand on her waist, while she placed hers on his shoulder. The song was something slow and old, and they moved through it without speaking. Emma smelled like lavender and something warmer, and Daniel realized that this close, he could see the small freckle near her collarbone, and the way her eyes reflected the string lights overhead. "You're doing great," Emma said quietly. "Better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know." Awkwardness. "You standing 3 feet away from me the whole time." Daniel's thumb moved slightly against her waist without him meaning it to. "Would that have been better?" Emma didn't answer right away. When she looked up at him, her expression had changed into something he couldn't read. "No," she said. "This is better." The song ended, and they returned to the table just as Aunt Diane's voice cut across the room. She was standing near the bar with a man in his early 40s, polished in the way people are when they spend too much money on their appearance. His name, Daniel learned quickly, was Connor. He was Emma's ex-fiancé, and he was looking at her the way someone looks at a car they regret selling. Emma's entire posture shifted the moment she saw him. Daniel watched her shoulders tighten, her smile turn brittle. Connor crossed the room toward their table with Aunt Diane trailing behind him like a proudly deployed weapon. "Emma," Connor said warmly, "you look incredible. I didn't know you'd be here." "It's my cousin's wedding," Emma said. "Why wouldn't I be here?" Connor's gaze shifted to Daniel. "And who's this?" "Daniel Cooper," Daniel said, extending his hand. Connor shook it with the grip of someone trying to prove something. "Connor Hayes. I'm an old friend of the family." "He's my ex-fiancé," Emma said flatly. "Let's not make it cute." Aunt Diane lit up like someone had handed her a script. "Connor was just telling me about his new business. He's doing very well for himself." "Very well?" Connor smiled modestly. "I can't complain. Though I do miss the days when things were simpler." He looked at Emma meaningfully. "Some decisions you make when you're young don't feel as smart later." Emma stared at him. "And some decisions feel smarter every single day." Connor's smile tightened. He turned to Daniel. "How long have you two been together?" 3 months, Daniel said. "That's not very long." "It's long enough to know," Daniel said evenly. Connor studied him for a moment, then turned back to Emma. "I just hope you're being careful. You have a tendency to jump into things." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. Emma's hand found his under the table and gripped it hard. He looked at Connor with the same calm he used when a contractor tried to bully him into a bad decision. "She doesn't jump into things. She thinks them through more than anyone I know. And if you're here to make her feel bad about a choice she made years ago, you can save it." "She's not interested?" Connor's expression flickered. Aunt Diane looked like someone had just spoiled her favorite television show. Emma's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. Connor recovered quickly, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I didn't mean any offense. Just looking out for an old friend." "She doesn't need you to look out for her," Daniel said. "She's fine." Connor left shortly after, and Aunt Diane followed him, muttering something about people being oversensitive. Emma stared at the table for a long moment, then turned to Daniel with an expression he couldn't parse. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. That was the most anyone's ever stood up for me like that." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. The reception continued around them, but something had shifted. Emma stayed closer to him after that, her hand finding his more often, her shoulder brushing his when they stood side by side. When they finally left the reception near midnight, the rain had started again, soft and steady against the windshield. Emma was quiet for the first 10 minutes of the drive. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Yeah?" "I didn't just ask you because you were convenient. I asked you because I trust you, and because I knew you'd do it right. She paused. And because maybe I wanted to know what it would feel like if it were real? Daniel kept his eyes on the road. The wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm. What would what feel like? Emma turned to look at him. This? You. The way you looked at me when we were dancing. Daniel's chest tightened. Emma. I know. It's messy. We worked together. This was supposed to be fake. She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. But it didn't feel fake, Daniel. Not to me. Daniel pulled over into an empty parking lot outside a closed diner. The rain drummed against the roof. He turned to face her, and Emma was watching him with an expression that was open and nervous and impossibly real. It didn't feel fake to me either, Daniel said. Emma's breath caught. So what do we do? I don't know. But I know I don't want to go back to eating lunch alone at my desk and pretending I'm fine with it. Emma smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her all night. I don't want that either. Then we figure it out, Daniel said. Emma leaned across the console and kissed him. It was soft and careful and tasted like champagne and rain, and when she pulled back, her forehead rested against his. That felt real too, she whispered. Yeah, Daniel said. It did. 3 months later, Emma moved the last of her boxes into Daniel's house on a Saturday morning while the rain returned to Portland like an old friend. They unpacked her books onto his shelves, and she complained about his terrible taste in coffee mugs, and when Daniel found the garment bag from the wedding folded at the bottom of one box, Emma told him she'd kept it because it reminded her of the night everything changed. 6 months after that, Daniel proposed in the same parking lot where they'd first kissed. Emma said yes before he finished asking, and when they told the story later, people always asked why he chose a diner parking lot in the rain. Daniel just said it was where he'd stopped pretending, and Emma said that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. A year after the wedding, they were married themselves in a small ceremony in Emma's parents' backyard with string lights and no vineyard in sight. Aunt Diane cried and told everyone she'd known all along. Connor was not invited. What would you have done if someone you barely knew asked you to fake a relationship for a family event? And have you ever had something that started as pretend turn into the most real thing in your life? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.